Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and tonight I've got Mac with me. Welcome, Mac.
Good evening.
Tonight we're going to be going over the Premier League games from this weekend. We'll quickly predict what will happen in the second leg of the Champions League semifinal matches taking place this week. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social media, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is @houseof_footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. All right, Mac, let's dive straight into the action. The first game that we're going to talk about, high-scoring game, though it didn't look like it was going to be... It looked like it was going to be a lot more one-sided, and I think the result overall shows... I guess is a little bit better for Spurs. It looks better than it was. But ultimately, Liverpool 4, Spurs 2. A game where actually Spurs started quite well in the opening minutes. They threatened, and Liverpool really couldn't get out of their half. But Liverpool got on the score sheet. Salah, of course, the man that we're kind of looking at to see what type of reaction we'll get from him, considering what happened with him and Klopp, of course, last weekend at West Ham. He gets on the score sheet, and then as well, it was Robertson who gets on the score sheet as well midway through the second half, kind of a little bit past the midway point. And even up to that point, Spurs were quite comfortable on the ball, not necessarily threatening too much, but still had a chunk of the ball. But it was just Liverpool after that, creating more and more in the second half. More so, Liverpool started the second half well, and then Spurs clawed back 2 goals, which we could talk about in terms of were they just consolation or was there a little bit there for Spurs to chase at. But overall, Mac, let's hear your takes on this result.
Firstly, I think the separator between the two teams was that first half, as you kind of highlighted, where Tottenham started off well. They had possession overall through the course of the game. They dominated in possession, having over, I think it's 56%. And even in the first half, they had 55%. So you'd still net even between the two halves, where Tottenham were more comfortable in the ball. But were they really a threat? No. And I think the stat kind of I look to is where Tottenham only had 7 touches in the opposition box, where Liverpool as a whole team had 31. Robertson and Trent both had 9. Salah had 8. So just the when Liverpool did get the ball, they were clinical in their movements, they were decisive in their actions, and they were able to get into the final third, get into the box, and start to be able to create opportunities for themselves, which they did. Which is why in the first half they had 14 shots and 8 were them on target, scored 2 goals, expected goals of 2.29. So in terms of a domination side, aside from carrying the ball, they did everything. Spurs offered only 1 shot, 0.04 goals expected in the first half, and that really showed there. Even though the second half, you can, depending on your viewpoint on it, you were like, oh, Spurs tried to be able to fight back, or did Liverpool take their foot off the gas? I think that's a kind of a mismatch of the truth is somewhere in the middle. But I think holistically, when you look at it, because you had such a dominant first half, where I think in some, from a Spurs perspective, in most kind of a saying let's have, you can't win the game in the first half, but you can lose it. And it felt like Spurs lost it there. And that was kind of the tough part on that end. So I think in terms of an overall perspective, Spurs got what they're coming to, kind of coming out that lackluster effort. And you can kind of see how the wallowing or not the downfall, I think that's a little bit too harsh for Postecoglou has happened. Because now you're facing consistently week in, week out, these bigger, tougher teams in the Premier League. And as of right now, that Spurs team isn't up to snuff. And the interesting part, we may not get to them much in this game, but they were given an opportunity here. If they did come away and were able to snatch all 3 points, they could then in some way control their own destiny of making the Champions League as possible, because Aston Villa lost against Brighton. So to come out with that effort, be given that kind of that gift to chase, but they never did. So they didn't really show up there. So very disappointed on the front from Spurs, and that's why, of course, they went on to lose the game.
Yeah, even from the beginning, Mac, something that stood out to me was how he lined up his team, and it was 3 midfielders in the likes of Bentancur, Sarr, and Basuma, which you normally see typically Madison, if he's fully fit, start as that 10 in that spot. But I think as well, a big emphasis that Ange tried to do in this game was match up Liverpool in terms of the man-to-man from the press, which at times in the early beginning of the first half was quite effective. Liverpool even in throughout the games, there were instances where they gave the ball away. I think it may as well, I think, led to one of the goals towards the end. But yeah, and of course that meant that Son would start down the middle, Brennan Johnson start down the left, and Kulusevski down the right. And you would think, I think the commentator said that Trent Alexander-Arnold would probably be happy that Brennan Johnson was the one who's starting on the left rather than Son, because if it was Son, he has a little bit more to offer, I would say. No disrespect to Brennan Johnson, who I think had a decent game, but I think we all know what Son is capable of. And if he's sort of occupying that spot, Trent is definitely going to be more thinking more about going forward, and also he's going to, of course, have to deal with them one-on-one. Richarlison did not come out to score, kind of how I predicted. But, of course, it was when essentially, like you said, the game was kind of over. A host of changes happened towards the middle of the second half after Liverpool did score their fourth. So I would think it was kind of game was sealed there, though there was a little bit of an opportunity even at 4-2. I think Spurs had a couple chances that could have went their way, but also Liverpool had their chances as well. So that's something interesting to note, of course, for Liverpool now. That's a great result, and it looked like at Anfield kind of the Liverpool of old. And something to note is this is the second last game that Liverpool will have at home this season with Klopp. And of course that means all these moments will be cherished. But something that stood out to me was kind of the goal scorers, kind of the passing of the baton, and the fact that Salah and Robertson scored in the first half. And then it was Gakpo with the great header from the Harvey Elliott assist, and then himself getting on to score probably his best goal for Liverpool in his career so far. So that's kind of the shift of, okay, these were our mainstays, with Klopp maybe bleeding in the new players. I think Basetic also came on towards the end of the game to get some minutes, and not sure if that's something. I'm sure that has to do with, the game's kind of done. We want to rotate our players, but also, hey, could we look at what the future is? And I'm sure that those players, because of course Gakpo getting on the score sheet, Nunez didn't play, might be something to look at in the future of what that front three may look at. So credit to Liverpool for getting the win ultimately at home. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about Spurs, Matt, because this means the fourth Premier League loss in a row for them. I think it's the first time for them in the Premier League, and it's a really, really tough run of form. Of course, they were scoreless, I think, in the last two games, and they finally were able to score in this game. But again, if you score against Liverpool, it's not the toughest thing to sort of do in the Premier League. So have we learned anything from Spurs here, Matt, considering, of course, they do have, I think, Man City to play. They also have, I think they have a couple of other tough matches still to play towards the closing of the season. So it's still a lot to play for. They could have definitely closed the gap between themselves and Aston Villa, but definitely didn't help themselves with the result.
I think in some ways, yes, we learned in terms of the rotations needed and how injuries have really piled up for them, where they do need to be able to make quite a significant investment into Postecoglou for them to be successful in the coming years, which I think is only fair, only makes sense, is what is anticipated from this club, where, okay, we need to be able to, I would argue, you're probably looking at maybe 4 or 5 major signings for them to be able to compete at this higher level. I think the only tough part would be is where it hasn't set too much of a sour mood in the club, considering where you started so strong, you ended poorly. Are they going to be given that fair? Is he going to be given that fair opportunity? I think he should. I think when you're looking at kind of a Spurs fan's perspective, where, hey, this is kind of your opportunity to really invest, believe in not just a manager in terms of their philosophy and their personality, because if he's the type of manager you would want to see Spurs, where he's exciting, he's front thinking, he's going to be able to try to help be able to create opportunities for his team and watch them grow. And even though you may not be always consistently, I would say, competing for trophies, you might be in a position to, at the worst case, even if you don't win, you're going to be in a position to be very happy with how your team goes about their business. So I'm a Spurs fan. Again, I want to be able to see it kind of map out, see him be given that opportunity to be able to kind of express himself and continue to grow this team. I think, though, on the other side, one thing I feel like I did learn is where it's the emotion and at Anfield right now, it's a little weird to me. And here's what I want to be able to go about this. I think, obviously, hindsight being 2020, I'm a little bit disappointed. I'm here to see your thoughts on this, is where Klopp shouldn't have announced that he was going to leave. And I want to take it back. I was taking a look back. What is the most similar situation that we do have as a one-to-one comparison? And now that would be Alec Ferguson. And he's written in his autobiography, I think it was back, where he initially, back in 2001, and at the beginning of the season, said he's done, he's going to retire. Then he had noticed that he wanted to stay on. Of course, he stayed on until 2013, won a bunch more titles, Champions League, etc. Right for him. But he said in that season, the team had so much pressure, malaise, where it was so difficult for them to perform. And that was the biggest mistake he made in his entire career. Where maybe if this is announced now, maybe they're already out of the title race or not, then the feeling in the stadium wouldn't be to the level it is. Do you see what I mean? Where going into the game, it was pressurized immediately, day in, day out. They have to compete. This is the last chance for them to be able to do anything. Versus kind of let their players play and let them be able to a little bit more free flow. I understand now if he came out the last game of the season and said, "Oh, this is my final day," he'd be like, "Oh, I just heard blah blah blah, sadness, sorrow, blah blah blah," all that type of stuff. So I feel like you'd go about either way, and I'm definitely taking the hindsight point where we know what ended up happening, and I now forever on will be, it's like, okay, maybe if he didn't say that, would they have done better off? And he's going to get that critique, and the club is going to get that critique. What are your thoughts on that, considering how this game felt? I would feel like, even though they're up 4-0, but it didn't feel like, it felt like there was nothing to play for, and I was a little disappointed to have it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, still, I definitely respect Klopp's decision to do it himself. He's of course in charge of his own sort of actions, and so with him coming out and doing that, the club, of course, supporting him, I'm definitely okay with that. It's something that I think we're going to all debate for years to come, if that would have changed anything at all. But ultimately, I think Liverpool were still trying to achieve something in this season, where last season was such a struggle. This season, I think the team has performed up to par to what they would expect of themselves. So I think not just for Jurgen Klopp, they would have been playing this way. They would have done that for themselves as well, because things change, and even now we're talking about well, maybe I brought it up, but your Salahs, your Robertson, even Van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold, even in terms of the contract situations. So themselves playing themselves into sort of those talks about maybe, are they going to be moving on? Is it time for a refresh? It's all sort of coming into it all kind of coincided, which I think did give the team a little bit of the boost. But of course, it's a long season. I think the commentators in the game were saying that Liverpool played 18 more games than Spurs, who did not have any European commitments. That came into effect as well. So, of course, I would have been interested to see what would have happened. But ultimately, the result is the way it is. Liverpool have dropped games where they, of course, needed to win, and ultimately, the players are definitely at they have their own blame in certain phases, and that's just going to happen in terms of dips in forms, injuries, and whatnot. So ultimately, I think I'm, as a personal Liverpool fan, I'm definitely okay with how it occurred, but definitely would be interested to see what happens, or what would have happened if that announcement didn't come through. But we'll definitely argue more about that. And of course, like you said about Spurs, I think it is, if they do finish in the top 5, it could be great achievement, just how they turn things around, much like, I guess, Liverpool, where last season you didn't expect Liverpool to do as much this season. Spurs as well, new manager coming in. It's credit to them how well they've done so far. But that's only so far, because, of course, Chelsea won heavily today as well against West Ham, 5-0. Essentially, Mac, one team came out to play here, and the other one came out because they had a game to play. And that, of course, is Chelsea playing like prime Barcelona at times. What were your takes on this game, Mac?
One, I feel like, again, we're now seeing Chelsea. It's great to see consistency, where I really enjoy two players on their pitch particularly. It's the combination of Cole Palmer with Madueke, who has grown into that right wing role, where previous towards the beginning of the season, the middle of the season, that's where more so Cole Palmer were played. But now he's moved over into the 10 with the kind of the shuffle around of Gallagher, Fernandez being out, Caicedo playing in midfield with Gallagher. All of that there for me, those four make so much sense together. If Mudryk could finish, they would have been up maybe 7-0 in this game because he had a couple of really good opportunities as well. And by them playing in such a high level, being able to create opportunities for themselves and for their teammates, they're making Nicholas Jackson, who is, let's be frank here, a average at best Premier League striker, score a decent amount of goals, right? So credit to them in that, and not to discredit Jackson. It is what it is. I think he was only bought for like £25 million, so it's not like was assigned to be the savior. I know a lot of blame has been thrown on him for many of his missed chances, which is fair, but I think the reason why he's still putting up good numbers is because you have a player like Madueke on a 2-0. Okay, you know what? I've already got my goal today. Let's tee you up for an easy one, right? And you have players like Cole Palmer creating opportunities for his teammates to, like Mudryk, miss them, or for example, like Madueke, score them. So it's very hit and miss. But again, like I said, those four really, really enjoy what they're doing at the back. If Thiago Silva's not playing, there's huge problems. And of course, Thiago Silva played this game, so it seems like things are a little bit more set there. When he does finally turn into dust or move on after this year, what happens there, I don't know. So I think, at the very least, in terms of what I've taken away from this game individually for Chelsea, is those four players. Caicedo, Gallagher, Palmer, Madueke, as four of a front six, realistically, all makes sense to me. All lines up fine. Where else on the pitch? And that leaves, 7 other positions to really worry about? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, of course. Quickly reading out that in Enzo's absence, Chelsea's last 4 games, they have won 3 and tied 1. And that's, of course, the game that they tied against Aston Villa, and won all those 3 other games with a total score of 13-0. And that's against Everton, Spurs, and West Ham. So that's something that's going to be glaring, of course, with Enzo Fernandez, the big money signing coming in. We'll see how they bounce back. But, of course, we expect him to bounce back next season. And now the talks are, of course, Poch in. The way they're finishing the season could very well challenge for those top 6 positions, overtaking Manchester United, of course, who are yet to play tomorrow. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but that's a great sign for Poch, because now, like you said, a couple of those positions are now kind of they're righting themselves. And now it's up to those players coming back from injury, which there are a couple, I think, and Nkunku's coming back. I'm not sure if he played. Honestly, I switched the match off after it was 3-0, but I know he was warming up, so that's great for them to sort of have that competition within themselves. Mudryk, though, yeah, if you're going to have Nicholas Jackson score 2 goals and you don't get any, that's like the thing that Chelsea fans were missing to make it a perfect day. But we'll see what happens with Mudryk. Maybe he is one of those players that steps up next season. We'll just have to wait and see. But West Ham just poor. I think they're just waiting for the season to end, and they just need some switches in the offseason. We'll cover that, I think, more in detail in the offseason. But let's move on, Mac, to quickly preview Crystal Palace versus Manchester United, because, of course, Chelsea just leapfrogged Manchester United with that win. And the match between these 2 teams earlier this year, Mac, Crystal Palace won at Old Trafford 1-0 with 22% possession, which was, I think, telling in itself that Man U, given the ball, if they are given the ball, they're not exactly the most clinical, and they might not use it the best as opposed to other teams in the Premier League. So with that being said, a game at Crystal Palace, an atmosphere that's, of course, going to be ready to receive such opposition. I am interested in what your takes are going to be for this game. So, Mac, let's hear from you.
I'm going to immediately go into Manchester United pressure cooker situations. One, you're looking at Harry Maguire, who has been your best center half the season, is out injured for 3 weeks. So does he make it back even for the cup final against Man City, which I think you're looking at it right now? Let's say Manchester United win out the rest of these games. Maybe let's say they win the rest of their games other than the game against Arsenal. I think in that case, Ten Hag is still probably fired at the end of the season. But if he does win the FA Cup, I think there's a conversation that they'll have internally, like, do we bring him back? So I think there's so much pressure heaped onto that individual game to know that he's going to be injured. It's a tough look. So as you highlighted in our notes here for the podcast, is where that in all likely means Casemiro is going to start at center half with a youth academy player. That's not a great situation when you're looking at the Crystal Palace team, who have more recently been firing on all cylinders. They have been much more of a goal threat. I know they did recently just tie Fulham, but after they had won 3 on the bounce against Newcastle, West Ham, and Liverpool. So they've had good performances against strong teams. So I think that they can be a threat. Mateta's in the best form of his life. And Eze and Elise can always be threats. So I think if you're a Manchester United fan, you are worried considering the mishaps you'll have on defense, quite potentially, the areas of the pitch. Because, again, if that means Casemiro starting at center half, who's playing in defensive mid? It's a domino effect if it becomes worse down the line. So I'm very worried about how they'll handle on the ball and in transition moments. I think if they get to the ball into the final third, the likes of Bruno Fernandes, Garnacho can all be threats and all create opportunities. But I think I'd be so stressed and so worried you're going to have such an open game. And I think in an open game, that's going to suit well very much for Crystal Palace as well. They've been performing recently. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Casemiro's going to be starting at center back, I would have been interested to see how he would have played against Crystal Palace, who the midfield two that they've really been going towards would be Wharton and Hughes, which played quite well against Liverpool. Of course, I would remember that game. They were the best midfield in that game. They've been a consistent pairing up to this point as well. I would have wanted to see how Kobe Mainu and Casemiro do against them. But now Casemiro is dropping out. Kobe Mainu himself could be paired with McTominay, could be paired with Eriksen. And I'm just not sure that McTominay... It's like if you could fuse McTominay and Eriksen together, that would be the perfect mix. You have the physical ability.
And a sprinkling of Fred?
Maybe Fred, the flair there, maybe. Because, of course, we know Kobe Mainu can do, but that's if he has the ball. We're not certain yet. Of course, his first really full season as a starter for Man U. And so having that to ask him that against a midfield pairing of Will Hughes and Wharton, who have played quite well, that's going to be interesting. And then, of course, shielding it behind them, you're going to have Elise, Eze, who's, of course, looking like he's going to be coming back from injury, dropping into those pockets, pulling Casemiro and whoever else they start in defense out of those positions. I don't see anything but a Crystal Palace win here, really, and that's going to be a very, very big result for Man U, who themselves are chasing a European position, but with Chelsea winning, Newcastle winning themselves, they do have a game in hand on those two teams above them, but games are coming quick, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, they also play Arsenal not too long from now, and have some important matches to finish the season off with. So Newcastle themselves as well, that's going to be a huge, huge game. So very interested to see how this comes out. I guess the individual quality of Garnacho, Hojlund, Bruno Fernandes, and dare I say Anthony pull them out of this game? Mac, your response?
To the last part, no. To the first three, maybe. Definitely potentially. Again, it's going to be very interesting. I think because the interesting part will be is Crystal Palace are playing at home. So do they try to be more expansive, where we might see a similar game in a weird way to what Manchester United played at home against Burnley, where it very much was back and forth. I think we may get a similar type of feel in that matchup. I think maybe the difference would be are Manchester United going to be more clinical in those moments, maybe be a little bit more better in midfield to be able to deny such an easy transition opportunities, and it really felt like it was a hot knife through butter going through their midfield to get into that final third for Palace. So I think we may see large sections of this game very, very open, because at the end of the day, Crystal Palace is just playing for glory and just playing for fun and wants to be able to express themselves. But Manchester United are playing with pressure because with new ownership and all likelihood, new management coming in next season, they're all playing for their jobs. So it's a very different feel going on for them. So I'm very excited to see how this game turns out.
Yeah, of course. We'll definitely cover that in our next podcast. So we're going to take a quick break here. We'll come back with some relegation battle chat, and we'll also predict the Champions League semifinal second matches coming up. So stay with us, guys. Welcome back to House of Footy, guys. We are going to continue now discussing the relegation battle and the games that affected the relegation battle this weekend. I guess we'll just go around talking about all three teams. That's, of course, Sheffield 1, Nottingham Forest 3, Luton 1, Everton 1, and Burnley 1, Newcastle 4. I'll go first, Mac. I was watching this one closely, Luton Town versus Everton on Friday. Everton won 1-0 up through a Dominic Calvert-Lewin penalty before Adebayo made it 1-1 right after the 30-minute mark. Just feels like it's not going to go their way for Luton. They had some chances here, but Everton as well themselves could have made it definitely more of a game for themselves. Ultimately, you have Jordan Pickford, and I think that's an underrated sort of trait that Jordan Pickford has. When he knows that the crowd is against him, I guess very much like Jamie Vardy or I'm sure there's other names you can think of. That's the first one that comes to mind right now. He's definitely a player that's difficult to play against. And so Everton players didn't look at this game as a meaningless game. They were definitely looking still to get all 3 points. Still weren't able to get that done, but enough to sort of cause Luton not to get all 3 points. Ross Barkley had a chance towards the end to get a nice goal against his old team in Everton, but ultimately 1-1. Luton still have a chance, but it's going to be tough. Any other games, or did this game stand out to you, Mac?
The other game that stands out to me is where Luton were looking to get some help from their fellow team that got promoted, and that's Sheffield United. And here's what I want to go to. Great for Nottingham Forest. I want to be able to say Callum Hudson-Odoi. Just see this individual game, you see why back when he was a youngster, why even though Chelsea for whatever reason fumbled his career, why teams like Bayern Munich will want to be able to come in and to be able to buy him, right? Where he has on his day that individual quality where to continue to be able to not just create opportunity for himself, but it's for teammates. And he had that Sheffield United defense in tatters, which is what I want to more so focus on. We may speak about this positive for Nottingham Forest on that end, but because just to be able to front load that, they were now in the position to really control their own destiny, picking up these 3 points. If they do well in the next couple of games, even if they lose against Chelsea, they should still somewhat feel comfortable, but they still are. They may potentially still go down. But they should. This is a great performance and was much needed for them, and them still waiting for their appeal where they may get a reduction on the points reduction that they received. But for the Sheffield United portion, they are now alongside Man City. I think what we can call them is Centurions, because now they've conceded 100 Premier League goals this season. And I think that is a mark to talk about, because the most ever conceded individual season was 100 by Swindon Town back when there was 42 games in the Premier League season.
Ooh.
So again, they've already beat that record. Congratulations at 36 games. So you're even better. Let's go. And as well as in terms of, I think we did a podcast earlier and we were talking about this is in regards to like the worst points total. They are up there with, or down there with still 16. So that's fourth all time if they stay on level points right now. Of course, they get a point later on the rest of the season. Who knows? But the other thing that's really keeping me excited and really glued to their matches is the negative goal difference, which that all-time record is negative 69. So they're at negative 65, 2 games left. Do you think there's a chance they get negative 70 on goal difference by the end of the season? That's what I'm really excited about with this relegation race right now. What about you?
I think they could score enough maybe to sort of keep it close, but their defense is so bad that they're definitely going to break that. And they're definitely going to concede more than 100 goals this season because, like you pointed out, Callum Hudson-Odoi had a very, very decent game. Maybe Chelsea might be looking at him instead of Mudryk on the left-hand side there. Something, of course, we can entertain, but of course, that still is a big point. Nottingham Forest do have that individual quality, and himself, even though Sheffield did take the lead through a penalty and had multiple chances to extend their lead in the first half, the defense ultimately lets them down. I think it was Yates' goal where there was a scramble in the box, and I think if it wasn't Yates, it would have been at least 2 other Nottingham Forest players that could have gone on to that that second ball that bounced in front of Yates. He, of course, puts it away, and even Callum Hudson-Odoi's last goal, you know what he's going to do. He's cutting in. he sits down the first defender, goes around the second defender, and just slots it in far post. Very clinical from him, but it's just a story of the season for Sheffield United where, yeah, I don't really see any way for them not to keep conceding goals. They do have Everton, who I'm sure will enjoy playing against Sheffield United this next match. And of course, Spurs, who might not have anything to play for other than maybe to make themselves feel better at the end of the season that they didn't qualify for the top four. They might be looking to put themselves up a couple of goals in terms of goal difference. So that really is the story. Like you said, Nottingham Forest have Chelsea and Burnley to play in the next couple matches. So that's still something to look out for. Luton Town will play West Ham and Fulham. And then, of course, let's talk about Burnley. They do face Spurs next and Nottingham Forest. So tough to turn it around. They, of course, were 4-1 losers to Newcastle. Anything stood out to you from this game, Mac?
I felt like this was kind of their final letdown, and it's not the final nail in the coffin for their season. There's still a slight chance. They need a lot of things to go their way to be able to have any opportunity to stay up. The good part is they still do face that, like I said, like we talked about, Nottingham Forest. So that still may be an interesting game at the end of the season, depending on how this next round of game goes between both Luton and Nottingham Forest. But though for me, it's Burnley. It's the 1-1 tie against Brighton recently, and the 1-1 tie against against Manchester United. They easily could have won both of those games. They were the better team in both of those games, and I feel like those were the opportunities for them. Where even if they pick up one win against either of them, now they're on level points with Luton Town, still to face Nottingham Forest, maybe the destiny in their own hand, something along those lines. So again, for me, I feel like it's a little bit too far gone. They still on the next matchup against Spurs. I don't anticipate Spurs to lose 5 games in a row. I definitely would hope not, because I would like them to have a little bit more confidence going and playing Manchester City, and maybe playing against Burnley with their open style might give a couple of their players a little bit of a good warm up. Unless Postecoglou plays the kids, which we talked about during the break. So again, I feel like it's unfortunate for Burnley in terms of, but they are the masters of their own demise, because they've had an abundance of opportunities to win games, but they've always consistently let this slip through their fingers. And this matchup, I feel like, even though they started off the game decently well, Newcastle were just so good, so much better than them. And unfortunately, because of the disparity of quality between the two teams, that's going to happen. And that's why when you do have the opportunities to win against a lot of these better teams, which they did, you got to take them. And unfortunately, it didn't. In all likelihood, they'll still likely go down.
Yeah, on the opposite side, I just want to quickly mention Newcastle. They were 4-1 winners, 4 goals from Wilson, Longstaff, Guimaraes, and Isak. Isak himself could have had a hat trick in this game, which is quite frustrating for him as a player, because he missed a penalty and definitely missed a tap in as well in one of the chances from this match. Of course, he did get on the score sheet, but we know that Isak was up there with your Hollands, your Cole Palmers, and even I think Solanke to win potentially the Golden Boot. But of course, Holland scored 4 goals this past weekend, so that's not looking very likely. But I did want to point out that Newcastle have been, and I think are actually, if Spurs don't get a good result against Burnley, and we expect them to lose against City, in trouble to actually lose that 5th spot, because if they're 4 points behind, Newcastle 4 points behind Spurs, and if they continue to win the expected games that they have remaining, which are against Brighton, Manchester United, and at the last day of the season against Brentford, I think all 3 winnable games for them, they could turn that thing around where we're talking about, hey, are they the team that are looking to part ways with Eddie Howe? If they finish in that 5th spot, hey, this is kind of, of course, a blip of what happened last year when they clinched top 4, but not too far from Champions League. So something to keep an eye out. So I think that's pretty much it, Mac. Let's now turn our attention then to something taking place this midweek, Mac, and of course, Champions League. The remaining semifinal matches, the second legs between Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, and PSG versus Dortmund. I'll toss it to you first, Mac. Any of these 2 games stand out to you? Which one will you be watching? For what reason? Go ahead.
Okay, obviously it's the Bayern Real Madrid game. The reason being is because we're talking about, again, we've highlighted through these matchups, the winner of this game is going to be the favorite at the finals. At the end of the day, no matter what, no conversation if and or be around that. The first 2-2 result, and what we talked about in our previous podcast, where for me, I felt like Tuchel coached a better game and was able to solve a lot of the problems presented by Real Madrid, but still didn't come away with the win. So if Ancelotti even has a neutral performance performing at home, you're going to edge them to be able to make it out on top because of kind of their experience, their know-how, them playing at home. We know that Real Madrid are going to score in this game, even just coming off of their celebration of confirmation that they're going to win the Liga. So I think they're up, kind of their joy, their factor that they'll be able to move past that, focus on this game. This is the only thing they have to really worry about the rest of the season. There's nothing really else for them to be able to play for. So focus on this competition and get out there and win it. So again, for me, I think that's what I'm looking at and teeing this up. I'll be honest with you. I'm going to start with my prediction and for this individual matchup, and then when we talk about the other one, I'll speak why I think it's conjoined. I think this game is going to finish as a tie in regular time. And then I think what will end up happening is we'll go in out of time. I don't think we'll reach penalties. And my call would be is that Real Madrid actually win it in extra time. I think we'll get a 1-1 tie. I think what in all likelihood will happen is where early on in the game, I think Spurs, that was a 40 line slip there. Bayern may get an opportunity on the break through Harry Kane, through Leroy Sané, a player of that ilk, score kind of maybe a jumbled goal. Real Madrid heap the pressure on themselves, are able to come through in the second half, because I feel like the game plan is going to be very similar for Bayern Munich, what they did last round versus this round in terms of being able to break them down. And I feel like right now, the center of defense, not just with De Ligt out, Kim not performing well, Upamecano always seems to be a problem. And if your most consistent center back is Eric Dyer, I feel like you may get a little bit of a tough shake at the Bernabeu. So that's why I think, of course, Real Madrid will score, going on to out of time, them to be able to create that opportunity, to be able to win that, win those two legs. I know that's very much maybe a little bit too excited of a matchup for you. You may want a little bit more comfortable of a Real Madrid win. But those are my initial thoughts going into this match. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's Madrid is going to come out and Ancelotti is going to say, hey, boys, you guys know what to do. Most of you have been here before. You know what's expected of you. It's really this match, and if we do win it, the Champions League final, that it stands between us and having another very, very successful season. A lot of players were rotated for that squad on the weekend as well. I think it was Jude Bellingham that came on to actually play in the second half, getting a goal himself. Apart from that, I think Vinicius also came on. Luka Modric, interestingly, played 90 minutes, but Cruz was rested. And you saw Militao and Courtois actually coming back. So that could be interesting to see if those players actually start this game. I do think, though, it's going to be a close game. I think either team wins it by a very, very slim margin in the first 90 minutes, though, because there's so much pressure on these two teams. I don't know if they can physically last another extra time. I think they're going to want to give it their all. I do edge Madrid out a little bit here just because, like you said, Bayern defensively, they were 1-0 up against Stuttgart this past weekend with they were tied 1-1 with Stuttgart this past weekend before the second half, and they eventually conceded 2 goals very, very late. And I think Madrid, if you give them the options and the chance to, they are going to punish you late in the game, especially with Kim and Dyer, likely the 2 starting center backs for Bayern. Though I do think both teams will score. So I think it's going to be maybe a 2-1 kind of result. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's, again, Real Madrid coming through in this match. Anything else in this game or the other match, Mac?
No, and to flip over into the other match, PSG versus Dortmund, I actually think we're going to see a much heavier result. I wouldn't be surprised if PSG win this game 3-0 or 2-0. The reason why is because them playing at home, I think they're going to be much more comfortable. When they were able to play away at Dortmund, you can kind of see there was a template of how to be successful against the Dortmund team. The previous matchup at the Parc des Princes, I think it is. That's right, yeah. That was a clear win by PSG. They completely dominated that game. I understand that was many, many months ago, but I think the template is there. I think in this game, we're going to see probably the best Mbappe that we'll have, because I think there will be a change in terms of their front three. I think Mbappe can't go into this game playing as the lone about striker. If it's Barcola centrally, if it's Kolo Muani starting instead of there, that's fine. Honestly, just start a pylon. It doesn't matter. but you need to be able to have Mbappe isolated out wide as many opportunities, because even if he's 1-on-2, he's still going to favor his chances against this young and I would argue very inexperienced Dortmund team. So and that's how I'll see it go. I think that the Dortmund PSG will score early, and then from there the snowball and that avalanche will build, and Dortmund may not be able to withstand it. I think their only path forward is actually something they haven't done in their previous matchup, is a complete change of formation. I think playing 4 at the back, they've very much played a 4-2-3-1. I would want to, and what I would do is I would shift to more of a 4-3-2 or a 5-3-2 or a 5-4-1, and just rely on the counter. That means you're probably taking off one of your better wingers, if that be Adeyemi or if that be Jadon Sancho. But I think you have to go into this game being comfortable with a 0-0 result. And I think the best way to be able to do that is be able to be in positions to double up and triple up on both Dembele on one side, and when the ball gets switched over to Mbappe on the other, and manage crosses. I think that's their only way for them to be successful. I don't think they'll make that change, which is why, like I said, I think PSG score early, score often, get out of this comfortably, and why I think we'll get, for me, I only want 2 matchups. I want a Bayern Dortmund, or I want Real Madrid PSG, and this, based off my 2 forecasts, my 2 predictions, we'll get a Real Madrid PSG, which will be a very exciting final for more than one reason.
For sure. Not to mention, of course, Marco Reus. I'm not sure if we announced it after we recorded our last podcast, but he will be leaving Dortmund at the end of the season. So this could be a great way for him to sign off if they do get into the finals and, of course, end up winning it. But I'm very much on your side as well, Mac. PSG did not even play this weekend, so their player is going to be rested, and of course, very much ready to play at home against a Dortmund team who historically haven't been good at keeping leads. I know that they've been keeping a couple of clean sheets here and there in the Champions League more recently, but in the league, they very rarely keep clean sheets. And of course, this past weekend as well, even though they won 5-1, still conceding goals. And just against Mbappe at home, I can't count him out. He is that player that, like I think we talked about it maybe in our podcast or off our podcast, that if there's a player that can turn a game on its head in world of football currently, it's going to be Kylian Mbappe. And he, of course, has a ability to cement himself as, if not one of the best, or right now could be the best PSG player in their history. He could bring them over the top, another Champions League appearance, and then, of course, who knows what happens in the final. So definitely agree there. Dortmund will have to be okay without the ball in this game, and that's definitely not their forte. Who knows? They could pull something out and get a goal themselves, but I just think PSG will score, and will score more than one goal, making it, of course, very difficult for Dortmund. That being said, though, I'm not exactly sure this is sort of what I do expect PSG to come through, but it's kind of giving me a sour taste in the mouth, because, of course, we would have wanted a more, I guess, personally, a Dortmund fairy tale ending would be more heartwarming for neutrals. That could be that if they do face Dortmund, that could be Bayern in the final. That could be very much a chance for themselves, as we all know, to put another dagger in the Bayern Munich hearts at the end of the season. I should have mentioned it before as well. I think Bayern players, a lot of those players, very much like Liverpool at the top of the podcast that we talked about, if they don't win anything this season, could we see a big exit for a couple of those players, much like Tuchel? And of course, I'm talking about maybe Thomas Müller, the likes of as well Kimmich in that Bayern side. If these things happen, both for, I think, Dortmund as well, not just mentioning Marco Reus, things could change for both teams respectively in the Bundesliga, and we could see new faces lining up for these two teams. But just very, very enticing 2 sets of matches that we have here. Before, I guess, we sound it off though, Mac, any final words on these 2 games? Anything else you'd be watching out for?
I think we talked about it enough, and as well as going over the first legs and our reactions to that. I'm just very excited to see what happens, and hopefully we get two excellent games and tee us up for potentially a very interesting final.
Yeah. Okay, so this concludes our podcast for today, guys. If you guys like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at @houseof_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well, houseoffooty@hotmail.com. The next time you hear from us will be Thursday when we review this week's Champions League action, and we'll also preview the league and tee up the second leg of the Champions League semifinals and the matches coming up this weekend as well. So until then, Mac, thank you for joining us.
Peace out.
See you guys soon.